Thank you for stopping by the Bluegrass Podcast. This week we're talking to Carrie from the Terpene Therapy Podcast, another great Kentucky Cannabis podcast, focused on bridging the gap between consumers and producers, disguising education as entertainment. Picking on our porch this week, we are very grateful to have on Jacob Danielsen-Moore, playing Glow Around the Light and Don't Turn Away. Before we start the episode, if you'd like to support the podcast, consider rating us on Spotify or iTunes, following us on your preferred podcast listening platform, or donate to our Patreon. We also have a Bluegrass Cannabis store on our website where you can find clothing, accessories, and more, which also helps us keep the lights on and support our work in Kentucky cannabis legalization in Frankfort. You want to talk about your first time with cannabis and just what was that first moment where somebody brought something out or you got a bit of something?
Oh, dude, I remember the story just like it was yesterday. So how detailed do we want to get? I was down at the Louisville skate park, and I think that is a place where, you can make it happen if you got a dream. And we were down there. It was me and my buddy. Now, you shouldn't smoke weed at 14 years old. That's entirely too young. You should wait till your brain and body are fully developed. I, however, did not do that. So me and a buddy were like, we got $7. Let's get some weed. And I'd heard about it from the DARE program, of course. The DARE program kind of gave me a little checklist. And I heard about it from the DARE program, was curious, had friends try it. And I was like, well, let me succumb to peer pressure. Let's see what's going on. Although I don't really know if it was a peer pressure situation. I'd always kind of had an interest in consciousness alteration via video games or watching TV or doing all different types of things as a kid. If I could, ride a bike down a hill really fast to generate some adrenaline, it's like I would do anything to chase an alterated consciousness. And I recognize that now, that I've been looking back. So we just kind of naturally fell into that. And being in a skateboarding culture too, it's kind of a, butter on pancakes type of situation. So,
oh yeah,
we're down there.
Plus music.
Oh yeah, of course. And that, I guess the DARE program and music is where I learned about weed. Because I remember, first instance I remember weed being mentioned in a song was Green Day's Jesus of Suburbia. That was the first CD. Green Day's American Idiot was the first CD I ever bought. And there's a line in Jesus of Suburbia about something about Mary Jane, and I was like, oh shit, he's talking about getting high, because it's right around the time of the DARE program. So I'm getting all this interest build up, and we finally get the weed. And because we only have $7 instead of 10, we have to smoke it with the guy, which I wasn't complaining. He seemed like a pretty cool dude, and gave us this purple looking, now that I look back on it, it blew my mind because it was purple at the time. Now I look back on it, it was probably pretty mid. But when you have absolutely zero tolerance, pretty mid still gets you pretty stoned. And I remember we smoked pretty much all of the blunt. They taught me how to inhale properly and everything. And I remember getting very stoned my first time, to the point where it almost felt like it was like a key kind of fit into my brain, and all of the uncomfortableness, it's like I've always been uncomfortable in my own skin since being a young child. I've always felt kind of like it's always like I'm observing the world around me rather than interacting with it, in a sense. And the weed kind of slowed that down and made me felt like I was more present and in the moment. I guess it'd be considered a meditative experience. And also I remember thinking the distinct thought that I had, where I remember being like, wow, my consciousness is really altered, is understanding graffiti in a completely different sense. Before that, I just saw it as color on a wall, essentially, and never really thought too much of it. And after that, I saw it as a person trying to leave their temporary mark on this external reality that we all inhabit. And I was like, damn, I must be stoned. This must be what that is. Like, I'm out here thinking, it's like it's like I got thinking prime or whatever, my mind got upgraded in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember that. And also it was like I was thinking hard, but my thinking wasn't like, it felt like it was finally slow enough for me to catch up with my thoughts. Like all of my trains of thought that were constantly going on finally coincided into one peaceful thinking. And I don't know why that is or what that is, but I do know that it seems to, now looking back, 13 years ago, it seems that it's been a constant throughout my life as a good, positive trajectory kind of thing. The only negative trajectory that I've ever really had with it is due to the laws surrounding cannabis and its use. If those laws were not in place, then those negative issues that I did experience simply would not have happened. But yeah, that's kind of my first experience with it. I just remember getting really stoned and it being like a key that just fit into a lock that I'd never figured out how to unlock before.
Greatest man I know, he helped me build my home. He lived just a couple miles away. He played piano in the church, he ran the labor union at work, and he never missed a chance to stop and play. Don't turn away. Don't turn away from me. Don't turn away. Oh, I love you, but I ain't safe. Don't turn away. Don't turn away from me. Don't turn away. Oh, I love you, but I ain't safe. Train had lost its track, and we went out to help it find the rail. In his blonde hair, eyes blue, I knocked the wind right out of you. So we went back in that rhododendron hell. Don't look away. Don't look away from me. Don't look away. Boy, I love you, but I ain't safe. Don't look away. Don't turn away from me. Don't turn away. Oh, I love you, but I ain't safe. He said, well, I love you and all, but we could leave by fall, and we won't have to sneak or fool around. Yeah, I'm haunted by your ghost, and my wife, she even knows, but the boys ain't old enough to just move on. turn away. Don't turn away from me. Don't turn away. Oh, I love you, but I ain't safe. Now my life's a living hell in this brushy mountain cell. I think about you every day. Yeah, I'm haunted by your ghost, and everybody knows. And the boys won't even return my calls these days. It's down Devil's Creek and back. I killed and buried you by the track, and swore to God you fell into the drink. But you went away. You went away from me. You went away. I told you I wasn't safe. You went away. You turned away from me. You turned away. I warned you I wasn't safe. And I'm haunted by your ghost.
Did you leave the skate park and were immediately like, and you can take a moment while you smoke to answer this, but
Oh, no, we're good. We're good.
did you leave and then immediately were just like, I need to do this again? Or was it a little bit of time before you were like, maybe I'm going to do that again?
Ooh, that's a good question, honestly, because I don't know if I'm the kind of person where I don't really think about things like that until it's like time to do it. So it's like I liked it, and then I guess the next opportunity I had to buy weed, I bought it. You know what I mean? But I wasn't just like, I need to do this right now, immediately again. And I've never really thought about it that way. It's like even to this day, if I've got something to do where like I'm not going to get stoned before it, I'm just not going to smoke the weed, and I don't feel any type of way. You know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
I used to get a little bit of anxiety, but now it's just like, I don't get any type of anything until probably like 72 hours in. But yeah, leaving the skate park. It's actually funny that you mentioned that, because I experienced the munchies for the first time after leaving the skate park. And I think it was me and my friend, we ate, oh God, it had to have been like, between both of us, I think we got like 8 McDoubles, definitely two large sodas, and a fuckload of chicken nuggets. I don't remember exactly how many that we ordered, and we got like every different sauce. We were just trying them, like different sauce combinations. We were laughing, having a good old time. And we actually walked to that McDonald's from the skate park, and it's like a 2-mile walk. But I tell you what, we were having a good old time the fucking entire way there, just laughing and joking.
So that's the first flower. What was the first time somebody brought out a torch or some glass and was like, we're going to take a dab? Where'd you get introduced to that?
That's hilarious. Necessity is the mother of invention. So there wasn't anybody that had dabs that was in my circle of social influence at the time in which I started taking dabs. So the first dab I ever took was winter of 2013. And I learned that you could take the weed that you bought and stuff it in a glass tube and squirt butane through it, and it would put out this like golden colored liquid, which now I know looking back is probably just like the worst quality that you could possibly smoke, you know.
You learn in steps.
Yeah, of course, you know, and you can't, if you just start off with if you start off with the absolute best, you don't even understand why it's good. But yeah, we got some weed, we got a glass tube, we got some butane, and thankfully I had access to a flow hood. So it was a spark-proof flow hood made for paints. Essentially, it was a paint booth, and we would spray the weed, and take an ounce, maybe get 4 or 5 grams of shatter or wax, whatever the consistency happened to be based on my method that I used that day. Mm-hmm. And it's a very, very rudimentary processes. Now that I look back on it, I wouldn't do this at all. I'd just get a little rosin press. But 17 years old, squirt it, and then we put it in the vacuum chamber that we bought off Amazon. And we had like the little fuel pump and everything. Mm-hmm. And watching it muffin up, it is really cool watching a hydrocarbon extract kind of muffin up, and then it's like you release the vacuum and it shrinks back down, you do the purging process. And I think we did that for like 6 hours, give or take. And you should definitely do it a lot longer. But after that 6 hours, it was kind of like a clear golden color. And I was like, this kind of looks like what I saw on the internet. Let's try it. And so I scooped up what I realize now is a huge dab. And we just dabbed it on, it was a red hot dome titanium nail. So this is like you heat up the nail, put the glass mm-hmm. dome on top, and then put the dab in like the middle, like put it on the nail, and it kind of vaporizes off the nail and gets trapped by the dome. And then you breathe it in, and you can carve it with your thumb if you're extra heady. But I remember doing that and just being like, wow. And I'm sitting here with a hash pipe right here, so it's been downhill ever since. But yeah, the hydrocarbon stuff is definitely where I first got introduced into dabbing. And I just remember it, like I remember thinking, how much further can it go? At that point, it was like I felt like we had reached the pinnacle of smoking weed. Like I felt like we were isolating THC and making this ultra strong concentrate that nobody I knew had. And it's like I was blowing people's minds with it that were, if I was hanging out with people that were in their 20s, they wouldn't have given a shit because it was already around at that point. But for people that were my age at that time, it's like I remember giving so many people their first dab and them just being either blown away or completely freaked out by it, and they don't even want to touch it ever again, which that has happened a couple times. And I can understand why, because when you rip a dab at like 900 degrees, it's pretty strong.
Yeah, it's definitely a different experience. It's funny you talking about that, how much kind of like fun and sort of the attraction of like butane, because there is kind of it's the height, right? You're taking, in a certain strange way, you're taking it to the most extreme form, which is kind of like, it's fun and attractive in a certain way.
Yeah, you kind of feel like a mad scientist in a sense. It's like you're doing this crazy experiment on your weed to get the strongest experience out of it. And I tell you what, some of those first dab experiences rival any of the psychedelic experiences that I've ever had. I think extreme amounts of THC really quickly for anyone can be an exceptionally powerful experience,
I think as we all do at some point, and especially as the technology's gotten better, like live resins and live rosins and some of the more fresh frozen, like this different variety of concentrate that's come out.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good question. I have a very distinct memory of the first time that I'd ever seen diamonds and sauce consistency. So this is a hydrocarbon extract that is kind of jar
Diamonds and
cured,
sauce. Fuck, I haven't thought about that in like years. That's right.
right?
God damn.
Mhm. Yep. And so this was my buddy had a like taken a ski trip out to Colorado or whatever, and then used his little Star Trek holodeck to teleport the hash back to Kentucky. And we're sitting there and he's like, man, I've got the craziest shit you've ever seen. Like, this is just like some straight Walter White. Like, you can't even believe your eyes what you're smoking. And he pulled it out, and it was Viola was the brand. And this was Colorado 2015, give or take. And I think it was a very early iteration of GMO. So this was called garlic cookies at the time. This was like before people called it GMO. And it just had the most funky garlic cheese feet kind of terp that you could imagine. And I remember dabbing it and just being blown away by the flavor. Like I had realized that that was the moment when I realized flavor could really be the separation between good and great hash. From there, it wasn't much longer until I got introduced into rosin. And this would have been in Seattle the summer of 2015. So this was just about 6-7 months after trying the diamonds and sauce for the first time. I was in the dispensary. I had just turned 21. So of course I was very excited to go and, buy weed legally for the first time or whatever. And
As we are.
Oh yeah, as you should be. It's a cool thing. It really is coming from a society where the social stigma is very much negative, and also there's inherent risk to even possessing cannabis. Being able to use your ID and go into a storefront and purchase weed of whatever quality, which at the time, honestly, the stuff that was out then versus now, trying to keep up with the demand from nowadays, back then it was what we were getting was pretty decent out of the dispensary. These days I kind of feel burned on purchases more often than not, but we won't get into that.
Oh my gosh, it's so hard to go into a dispensary and be like, I'm going to be happy with putting my money down, whatever you're going to give me, which isn't on the people there. It's just like,
nobody working in that dispensary has any control over that, and you should always be kind to your bud tenders, be kind to the people that are helping you out, because they're doing their job, man. You know what I mean? And they're not the one that's making you unhappy with the quality. It's the people that are creating the products, and you should reach out to those people that are creating products that you're unhappy with and give them feedback. You know what I mean? That's the only way that we get more fire for everyone. But back to Seattle though. So we got this stuff called ice wax, and they told us it was like hash that had been pressed on a heat press and extracted that way. And from that, they told us to dab it at like 600 degrees. I think this was like when low temp dabbing was starting to be a thing. And the flavor experience of that compared to even the diamonds and sauce. I mean, it's been a long time since I've taken a hydrocarbon based extract dab. It's very few and far between these days. I definitely prefer some off the paddle or who's who rosin. It's the rosin's definitely, if you're looking for a plug and play concentrate, rosin is definitely the way to go.
and like, why, I guess in terms of like following through on it, what are the differences that you've seen in rosin and resin in these fresh frozen concentrates? Because I feel like you especially spend a lot of time around them. What sort of the differences that you've seen, not just in a market way, but just how have things changed?
Okay, so for the end user experience, how have things changed? I think that hydrocarbon extracts, the price floor has kind of bottomed out, and thus the quality has bottomed out. So people are trying to get as much out there as possible, and you're seeing, I don't know, the quality just become more questionable. That's not to say that there aren't people sorry, listen, this Moroccan hash is definitely not doing me any favors. The
No, it's all good, but I think I know
there
exactly what you mean,
yeah,
where it's like
there,
because there's a bottom, you see the worst people. Like you can find people who are doing it well, but that doesn't mean the
mhm.
vast majority isn't just like
And it's almost as if
undesirable,
the
maybe.
correct, and it's almost as if the people who are doing it well, the demand for hydrocarbon at that price point is a little bit slimmer these days, I would say. I can't speak
Oh,
on
a
every
hundred
single market
percent.
out there, but I
No, the
think that
margins on
people
everything
don't.
are way tighter for cannabis.
And so for the end user, that gives you, I don't know, just more of a mid-grade product. Whereas in the solventless space, I think even now I've had some bad rosin, but I think even the mid-grade rosins are going to be a little bit better um, than the mid-grade hydrocarbon extracts that are available today for the end consumer, especially when it comes to the high. I find that more of the original cannabinoid and terpene profile is preserved in the hash rosin process, or at least it feels like it. Maybe I'm placebo affecting myself, but I definitely noticed more of a THC heavy high on the hydrocarbon materials versus more of a flower style high from the rosin.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think with hydrocarbons, they'll just fade out because there's such a good last step. We're going to take this material we can't use for anything else, and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
get something out of that. And I think kind of talking about that like low quality, cheap price point, I think that that's where that comes in, where it's like there's always going to be someone who's going to take that last ton of trim and just be like, you know what we're going to do with this? Like, there's just the more we grow of all this, the more there just is for that. But
Oh
hopefully,
yeah.
there's more for rosin too, to where you just don't need to,
Yeah,
when
and
you,
I think that rosin's becoming more accessible as time moves forward. I think that people will be able to get better rosin at a better price point, but still to where it's you know reasonable for people on both sides of the coin. At least that's the reality that I would like to see, and I think that if people come together as a community and make it so, that's what we can see. You know what I mean?
100%. And it's one of those things where I think rosin in particular and some of the more fresh frozen stuff is easier to keep on site for certain people because you're not using
Mhm.
chemicals, you're not putting things under pressure in the same way. Like
Well,
it
you
is
don't need the
dangerous, but
same.
it's not explosive.
Correct, and you don't need the same certifications and regulations that you need to open up a hydrocarbon extract lab, which I'm not even sure if Kentucky has a framework for that yet. But I think that you don't really, I don't think as far as like doing a solventless lab, I'm not sure what, and I'm sure there's certain zoning things, but I'm not sure as far as like obtaining like a lab license to be able to use volatile solvents in whatever capacity you may need. There's all different types of hoops that you have to jump through to open up a hydrocarbon space. So I think that it's definitely, I would say the barrier for entry maybe is a little bit lower for people doing the solventless stuff too. But who knows? We'll see. We'll see what the market dictates. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Well, and like you said, what the regulations allow, they might just be like no processing on site at all. That's something
Hmm.
I'm really curious about.
And I would hope that that is not something that happens, because being able to cut out a link of transportation from site to site, not only does it improve the end quality, it also helps keep the price point a little bit lower, I think, for the end consumer, which everybody's going to be happier about. There's no reason for people to be spending money that they don't need to spend, especially nowadays.
Oh yeah, say it again for the people in the back.
Well, the hash ain't cheap and flour ain't cheap. And while it is a good tool, I think that there does need to be maybe like a happy medium achieved where people can you know, get access to good, clean medicine at a reasonable price. That's the reality I would like to see.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Mm-hmm.
I, hopefully it's going to be about scale too. I'd love to see
Right.
it to where it's like, I like the idea of the micro business framework that they have, except I don't like that they take out one step. I think you should just be allowed to go through everything like seed to sale on site, but just make
Yeah.
it like a quarter of an acre, a half acre, do whatever size you want for it. But just kind of like you're talking about, let all of those benefits come into play,
Mm-hmm. And that's going
especially
to help.
because some of the larger ones are vertically integrated too.
Yeah, of course. And protecting those things, like you said, is that's going to help people in Kentucky be able to start those, operations. And, I think, any time that we can, keep Kentucky cannabis in the people's hands, that actually live here, I think that's a good thing. Especially, we've got such a unique, not a unique, but maybe a ideal climate for this.
Oh, 100%. And that's part of the thing where it's, I think things might happen faster than people think they're going to happen. Like with Ohio legalizing, like, I think this process could be really sped up, possibly.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
hoping where they say greenhouses, they're going to allow light depth.
I wonder why they wouldn't. Are there any markets that don't allow doing light dep that you're aware of?
Illinois, where it has to be like fully indoor, like concrete floors, like
Man, I tell you what, whoever wrote that law is just they're trying to keep the small business out. I think it's so much harder to purchase a facility like that rather than just throw up a hoop house if we're looking at overhead cost. You know,
100%. In fact, that you have to do the third party testing anyways. I'm like, don't cut me off before I already get started if you're making me do the lab tests that show that my product is clean anyways.
hmm
Like,
So on that, how do we even ensure that, the labs are doing the right tests and also, playing fairly? Because I think that there are some pay to play labs out there that have definitely gotten caught doing so. How do we protect ourselves from that going forward? What do you think?
look results on batch testing so that they have to show the numbers that they're putting out. And then you
Okay.
also do random, just like shelf and batch testing, where when the state comes in, they're not allowed to select their samples or send in samples. The state just comes in and is like, lay it all out, everything in the SKU. I'm going to take two random ones, and those are the ones we're going to test. Because
Of
then
course.
it's
Okay.
like the quality control really has to be stepped up then to where it's not like, oh, we harvested this yesterday and then we sent it in for like mold and contaminants before we even like dried it.
Right. Which that's not given a chance for anything that's could happen because I couldn't tell you how many times that I've seen a batch get messed up in the drying and curing process from people not, you know, doing the proper procedures for preventing mold.
100%. It needs to be the product that the patient is getting. And I think
hmm
that's also about making sure that people are like actually enforcing quality control. Also, does the bud tender, like, do they know what mold looks like to where they can look at the jar and just be like, nope.
Well, do you think that a bud tender could get punished and potentially lose their job if they were to point something like that out?
I don't think that it would be that severe, but I've definitely had experiences where it's like management doesn't care even if the awareness is there. So, I
hmm
mean, like, you can't make people do it, but I think it definitely helps where, like, especially with consumers, if they're educated too. I really love the sealed jars where it's like no light can get in. And then part of me is also like, but I also want to see it because I know what I'm looking for before I buy it.
Oh yeah, and with a sealed jar too, that where the UV protective jars with flour, that flour is probably not going to stick around long enough if they're selling it at a commercial scale where it's like an eighth jar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
it's not going to be there long enough to where you're really going to want to worry about preserving it in that method. I think a standard jar is going to do just fine for the life cycle of that purchase.
Oh, yeah.
And
But
it allows for more transparency, which I think that transparency on every level is needed more so.
100%. Especially like the way that the licenses get handed out. I really am not a fan of this limited licensing. I'd like it to be unlimited where it's buyability, and you just sign up and are like, oh, hey, this is my facility. If it meets the standards, I'm allowed to put my product on the market as long as it tests right.
Mm-hmm. Is that what's going on in Kentucky right now? Is that because I always depend on your podcast and your platform on Instagram to keep up with all of the Kentucky cannabis legislative news.
We don't know yet. It could be limited, it could be unlimited. They're deciding that right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in a lot of states we haven't seen that. And I think it's because they do these like, we gave out the licenses, we're not giving them out in the future. Like, I think you have to write in a rolling cycle of like every second or third year, this is when we take like new cannabis applications. Because a lot of the states are like, oh, we're only going to produce in air quotes what is needed. But then that also leads to like price inflation that's unnecessary because it's like,
I could
well,
definitely see. Yeah.
Illinois, $250 for an ounce, even still, if it's a bulk ounce, like.
And it's not the quality that commands a $250 an ounce price point. You know what I mean?
You're getting $100, $70 ounce.
Mm-hmm. I actually was curious, do you think that, because I've been talking with people and I think it would be really cool for Kentucky to be sort of like a cannabis tourism hotspot location in the future, where we have a lot of these small farms that people can come and sort of have cannabis-based experiences where they might stay at the farm for a weekend and do a bunch of different tastings or do a garden tour or a hash facility tour or things like that. Do you think that's a viable thing for people to try and, build a business model around here moving forward?
Yeah, I think if they allow it in the regulation, that's the most viable business model. And I think that it makes so much sense because like you look at the bourbon distilleries and it's like so much of that is the tourism to the site and like, what's the process like? Like that's where you get the chance to educate people on, like we were talking about, different areas of Kentucky cannabis. Like that's where you give them identity and can educate people and give a face to the name and actually get into some of those things that are a little trickier and are a little more like Kentucky specific. It's not just ice cream cake in, a giant warehouse. It's Kentucky cannabis to some degree or another. No, I love it. It's additional revenue. And it's like, okay, now people aren't just buying our pot. They're, spending money at restaurants, getting a hotel, like buying other goods, checking out other things. Like, no, it's just a slam dunk win. And it's so much better for small producers than large producers.
And that's what I'm thinking of, because it's like that would be a great way for people to not only become sustainable members of their local cannabis community, but also create experiences for people where, I was sitting down with one of my friends the other day and we were talking about the difference between just seeing the tomato on the shelf at the grocery store versus understanding how that tomato got to the shelf and the whole story behind it. Who was the farmer that grew that tomato? What was the soil like where that tomato came from? Just there's so many factors that play into getting that tomato or that jar of flower onto the shelf. Let's give people an opportunity to actually see where that comes from. And I think it's like we've already got the infrastructure and people already know that Kentucky has a whole It's like we've got the bourbon trail already, and there's no reason why we couldn't have like the flower trail or the hash trail. There's so many different possibilities that we could do. And I think that our environment is very well suited to having a reasonably long growing season and still, producing, like, it's not like we're so far south where we don't get those nice, heavy, hashy kind of buds. I see a good future for here specifically. It's it's going to be a beautiful thing. I can't wait to see all the different farms pop up and come out of the woodwork.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it's so crazy because it would happen so fast because as soon as you let people jump in easily, how many farms that are already in existence would just be like, what? We can? Yeah, sure. Especially if they can sell it. Like, it would just be
Yeah.
so easy to get it into production in a few years. I think there'll be a
Do you think?
learning curve. I think
Oh,
there'll
of course.
definitely be like a seasonal, like, we're going to have to figure out a few different things. But I think, like you're talking about, I think one thing that happens here is we get those wild temperature swings towards the end of the season where it's like, oh, it's warm for most of the day. And then at night, it's going to drop down to like 40 or 50 and like get kind of cold. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really going to make for some nice resin production, like, especially
Oh,
as it goes
100%.
on and on. Like, I think even the outdoor stuff is just going to have rock hard buds.
Oh, yeah. And good material for washing too. I don't know how much of a history that I don't know how much of a history there is with like the hash and washing culture in Kentucky, but I definitely know that the cultivation culture is so deep here that it's like it's like you're saying, there'd be so many people just ready to go if you give them the opportunity. And I think that those people would also realize that given the opportunity of being able to actually legally do it without fear of persecution, they're going to end up having quite a bit of material to work with. There's no reason why we couldn't have a bunch of different hash farms all over Kentucky too, where you get to
Oh,
see
yeah.
the whole experience, because I think
Did you ever
oh yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
did you ever visit Heritage Mendocino out in like Humboldt County on the West Coast?
Man, I haven't been out to Northern California yet. That's on my list. I'm headed out to Oregon actually I'm leaving tomorrow. And I've been to like Southern Oregon, right? Basically like an hour from the border of Northern
Hmm.
California and Oregon. It's a beautiful, beautiful geography out there and just environment in general. But I have not been down there, which I've heard is a little bit different.
Oh, for sure. But if you ever get the chance, like you're talking about, like hash farms and hash makeries, they have a whole setup where it's glass windows and you can walk along and see them going and making concentrates and dabs and like, that tourism centric model. Like, it just reminds me of what you're talking about, where you go to the farm and you're like, oh, we saw the flower in the field. Now we're going to watch them turn it into hash. And now it's like exit through the gift shop if you want to pick some up.
Oh my God. And I tell you what, being able to give people that connection with what's in the jar, I think that makes them feel so much happier once they, make that final point of sale. It's like they really have it's not just the random flour in a sandwich bag anymore. There's a
Yeah,
whole
an
story that they
appreciation.
have. Yep. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be that way. This is such to be able to take, anybody can throw a seed in the ground and watch it grow, but to be able to really, have like a boutique cannabis quality and experience like that, which is what I feel like these farms are going to have. I don't think you can do this with bad weed. So to be able to grow really good weed at that scale and keep the people happy like that is I mean, fuck, that's really the dream right there. You know what I mean? Being able to build that connection too. Because I think it's a beautiful thing to actually be able to connect with people through this plant. It's one of the great equalizers that our species really has. Doesn't matter what you look like or where you come from, we can all appreciate some really good weed.
Yeah, and I think like you're talking about knowing who you're selling to. It's one of those
Hmm.
nice things where maybe instead of like, I don't want to sell 8,000 eighths, I want to sell 1,000 ounces. Like, these are the people who pick up their monthly ounce from me. And like, there's a consistency there, I think I'd say, more than like a, do you want our hottest new cross of fire and fire?
Right, which isn't going to be hot in 2 months.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, man, I tell you what. And then it also gives people an ability to develop unique genetics where this farm is known for their cut of this, and this farm is known for that cut. And you can't get this there and you can't get that over here. Well, it really gives people an incentive to actually go visit these different places, and, builds up a little bit of a mystique and sort of a like a desire to go actually try it out and make the journey.
Oh,
Because
for
I
sure.
think
It
that
gives the
there's
product desirability.
yeah, because it's just adding, it's almost like it's a new version of the excitement that people used to get when weed was like illegal and not legal in nearly half the country. I think Ohio is 24, so we're pretty much at half. Back then it was like a journey. It was like you're half the enjoyment of the weed was the making the journey to go get it. And it's like, oh well, you've come all this way and you finally are at like Terpene Therapy Farms or whatever in the future, and you can get my particular cut of Amnesia Haze that you can't get anywhere else. I think that
Hmm.
that type of journey is gonna bring back a certain feeling to the cannabis experience that's maybe lost from just driving down to the dispensary or setting up your delivery service.
100%. And I think Kentucky's really good at that, kind of like we're talking about. Like, you can go down these country roads, kind of, and all of a sudden there's just something there. Like, it adds to that sense of discovery and kind of like, oh, we're going back to the hidden spot. Like,
Oh
you know what
yeah,
I mean? Even though it's
especially
legal
out
in the
in
future.
hmm especially in Eastern Kentucky, out in those hills, man. I tell you what, that there's some of the isolation that occurs out that way is, I mean, no cell service. If you don't know where you're at, you really don't know where you're at. You know what I mean? And so it's like you can kind of have almost a mystery, like a little mystery adventure of even getting to the hash farm or the flower farm, wherever you want to go.
I never take it for fun. It makes my hand shake. But I'll trade you some for bud if we party at the lake. They put me on it for a week when I tried to die and no wait. And I couldn't find the bottom of the bottle, try as I may. And I don't want to drink, I don't want to be sober, I don't want to fuck, don't want you to come over, I don't want to have a killer time. I just wanna lie here and stare at the glow around the light. I don't wanna drink, I don't wanna be sober, I don't wanna fuck, want you to come over. I don't want to have a killer time. I just want to lie here and stare at the glow around the light.
I think as far as what would separate Kentucky from other places would be our unique soil microbiology, as well as the fungal environment that's in our soil. I was doing a little bit of research on the different soil types in Kentucky, and as far as I know, there's 3 different types of agriculturally used soils. And so each one of those is going to produce a slightly different flour that's going to produce a slightly different hash. It'd be interesting to see if we were to have, let's say like a bluegrass strain, let's say farm A down near the Jackson Purchase grows bluegrass, and then farm B near Bowling Green grows bluegrass, and then farm C over near God, I can't think of any little towns in East over near what's that? Oh God, there's one whenever I go visit my family down in Tennessee, we always drive through it. Corbin, down in Corbin or whatever. Those are
First
3
KFC.
Yep. Definitely the first KFC. That's the original KFC. And man, I tell you what, yeah, a lot of Kentucky history there. But I think each one of those 3 farms would grow whatever strain in a slightly different way. And it'd be interesting to see how that plays into it more so than the water itself. How do you feel
So
about
like
that?
influence on base material and the differences in the base material you get.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that all of that plays into the type of final resin gland consistency that you get. So whether it be a thin or a thick cuticle, or producing a waxier or more oily resin, there's all different types of things, and that really does play into all of the different ratios of nutrients that are in the soil, and also the different relationships between the fungi and microbiome that's in the soil. It's a very complex thing, especially after having that conversation with Brandon Rust. He opened my eyes a lot on the complexities of the relationships in which everything is connected, and how that goes into growing good weed.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever read a study? It got published earlier this year. It was from Colombia about growing the same clonal cut on different farms in the same area, trying to
No, I didn't.
develop.
You'll have to after we get it off of this, definitely send me that study. I'd love to read that, because and I think that just comes back into why Kentucky has such potential for setting up a unique cannabis market compared to most of the other ones that exist. I don't know if there's any other states where the focus is mainly on, setting up like a tourist market, which obviously, that's not going to be like the main thing. People are just going to want their conveniently bought weed, from right down the street on the corner.
Mm.
But I think that Kentucky is in a unique position where we do have so many operating farms already, that it's like you're saying, it'd just be a hop, skip, and a jump to make that transition to where we have a huge percentage of our market focused on creating that overall, I like to call it the total package experience, where you get that seed to jar education and interaction, instead of just buying a random jar off the shelf.
And it's still crazy that the Southeast hasn't really legalized yet, except for maybe like Florida on the way. So we still just have this huge
Yeah.
market.
Georgia's getting there too. Definitely, if
They're
you go to
working on it.
places like Atlanta, it's basically legal there. They've got pretty much their shops there, already. But
Hmm.
you gotta build the infrastructure. It's like, I've always said this, you gotta have the surfboard built before the wave comes. But I think that I don't know, it's untapped potential, and I think that every day that goes by that we don't push for something like that where we can differentiate ourselves from all of the other emerging cannabis markets, I'd hate for us to just become another one, quote unquote. I'd love to see some uniqueness
Oh
with how we
yeah.
approach things.
Well, like you're doing with the podcast and like different people doing different projects, that's how we keep it, right? Like keeping a Kentucky vibe, like actually trying to put our voices into this process, right? And being like, hey, we would
Yeah.
actually like to be here.
And I think that we're creating the reality right now, us doing this right now and having this conversation. The people that listen to this, hopefully they get a similar type of idea of, this could be possible and this would be a way to differentiate. Because I think if you don't differentiate now, we're looking at, saturation where every state that hasn't already legalized it is basically at risk of falling in line and just becoming another cannabis market rather than becoming the next cannabis market. And I think that that's a distinction that if people focused on it more, we could create something really magical over here.
Oh yeah. And this almost feels dark to say, but I think there's also like, especially in the world where anyone can do it, a lot of people will peel off because it's probably going to be more work than they think it is for a
Good.
reward that's going to be like good, but not incredible by any means, probably.
And I think that that is a prospector going into an agricultural career instead of a prospecting career.
A
They're
100%.
hunting, they're
Look at the,
hunting for gold. You're growing a crop. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Oh, yeah. No, it's
It's all about the
absolutely
perspective.
insane.
I don't think that people see it as a get rich quick thing. It's like you get 2, 3 good harvests under your belt and you're set, and that's not it at all. You're looking when you're wanting to enter the cannabis space, it's a lifelong commitment. At least in my eyes, it is for me. I think the reward is not getting rich and being able to fuck off and do whatever you want. The reward is perpetuating something that for our species should continue to exist and should be of the highest quality, and people should have access to education about it in a non-stigmatized way. You know what I mean? But yeah, man, I tell you what, it's like I feel so many different types of ways about it that it's like I could just break off into a million tangents.
Just like you're talking about, people want it to be destigmatized and they want to be allowed to be proud of it, especially
Hmm.
their products. Like if you grow it and then you process it, dry it, put it in jars, or, you walk it over to a press and you press it yourself, you just want to be able to make sure that it gets to the person who's going to use it in the condition you want it to be in, right? Like the
Hmm.
people who want to be here, I'm like, the quality is going to get better. And people, I mean, we already see it. Like the quality will just get better as time goes on if you let people take their own products and bring them to market. There's accountability and there's pride. Like you can be like, yeah, this is what I do. Like, check it out, try it. Let me give you the experience I want you to have out of this. Not just, all right, here's your creative 4,000. I guess I can make it to next year.
I'm just now thinking about this. For the smaller farmer versus the larger farmer, do you think that there should almost be a sliding scale system implemented for getting your products tested and on the market? Because I think it's going to be a lot harder for the smaller farmer to be able to, match the deep pockets of a large scale operation, and they might not have, equal access to testing in a way that the larger one would.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think part of that is one, making sure that you have like, again, that unlimited licensing. You don't just have your set number of labs who can kind of dominate the market, and they're the only ones you can go to. I think it was MCR Labs in Pennsylvania. I think it was them. Do you know who I'm talking about?
That name rings a bell.
If I'm understanding and remembering the story correctly, what it was is that they had some corporate clients who came to them looking for testing. They did not inflate their numbers and gave them accurate testing. And then they decided to no longer use them because they weren't inflating the numbers. So I think that like unlimited licensing to where you can actually go to a lab that's going to do their job will help reduce the cost. Like not because they're doing their job, but because there are a variety of sources, right? Like, because it's really not expensive to do it. A lot of times the charge is like, hey, we have a lot of regulatory overhead and we're also allowed to charge this because we're the only game in town. Or we're charging you also for the numbers. We're not just charging you for the test. So I think with time, if you open it up and you make sure that there's oversight for the labs, you can have businesses that can go and get a lab test done for like reasonably cheap. Like it shouldn't be an insane amount.
No, and there should be a quick turnaround too.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's one of those things where I feel like you want to preempt the problem, but it's also hard to make people do what you want them to do.
Man, yeah, it's because it's like I don't know what it comes down to me for that is I think that it's and let me know if I'm thinking down the wrong rabbit hole. Do you think it's the fact that we've existed in a market that is traditionally unregulated and therefore people have always kind of had a incentive to cut corners in a sense?
I think that logic makes sense, but I think that what's more likely is that, especially with these large businesses, it's not Joe from down the road who used to sell you a quarter who got a job. It's somebody from accounting, somebody from legal, somebody from advertising who doesn't work with products, who has no relevant experience with like consumer safety, who is now in a position where their main objective is to drive numbers and their incentive to actually educate themselves and understand what's going on underneath them is very low.
Oh yeah. In fact, I think they'd want to almost remain uneducated in a sense because they maybe like to sleep at night, and I think that once you become educated in that field, making those decisions to just continuously pump the numbers up for the sake of having a profitable or a more profitable quarter every single quarter. I don't know, dude. I think when you're the cannabis thing is such a unique product in this instance because while I understand the incentive and also the lack of education on the people in the marketing and advertising departments for a lot of these larger companies,
I'm saying that,
yeah.
I guess I should clarify. When I say that, I mean like they're now in charge of the company, right? They're in charge of cultivation. They're in charge of like all of these other things, but they come from advertising, and it's like
they're making decisions not based on the experience of the end user, but rather what's going to generate the best numbers at the end of the quarter. And I think that if they educated themselves, they would realize that the products that generate those high numbers maybe aren't the best for the end consumer. And so, yeah, how do you balance that though as a business? Because it is hard to stay afloat out here, and sometimes you do have to sell those money makers essentially.
Well, and what's hard is that like some of them are just actually like, and this is kind of where I think you draw that line between ignorance and negligence. Like in the case of True Leave, it's like, oh, the husband of the CEO was found guilty of bribing state officials for licenses, yet they were allowed to keep those licenses. Like There are also things like that where you can point to them and you're like, actually, this is just kind of extremely crooked. Like,
Yeah,
that's also
that's
the
a
hard
huge.
thing. There's such glaring examples of the largest members of the industry acting in terrible ways that it's also like, you don't want to crap on them, but it's also like you're not doing your due diligence. Like,
I wonder how we filter that out. It seems like, because that's always, I feel like that'll always be a thing unless people really come together and just choose ethics over profit, maybe.
think you have to federally legalize it too. And I think the states have to actually suck it up and deal with the fact that they have to actually look after this industry and provide the departments of cannabis control with support and with funding. You can regulate it all you want, but you
Hmm.
have to provide like the infrastructure. You have to build a department that's educated and understands how to help people. Like, you have to invest in that too.
Right. And one that's not so stretched thin that even if they are educated, that it doesn't even matter because they don't have the resources or energy. You can get your employees can get burnt out and stop giving a fuck. So it's like they could get so stretched thin that even if they are educated, it might not even matter. You know what I
Or
mean?
your turnover rate. Everybody
Yes,
there
that
has only
too.
been there for 6 months.
Yeah, man, I tell you what, and that's not even enough time to necessarily build any kind of understanding of the market that you're working in almost.
No.
It's like how do you know who you're working with, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. And I mean, let's be real. It's probably the guy that they hired for cultivation's SOPs from like, 3 harvests ago that they've never touched. Like,
Hmm.
you go into some of the facilities and it's like, okay, it's clear that it's been a while since somebody was here who knew what they were doing.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
you can see it was set up originally in a way, and then you can see just the deterioration into madness.
So how do we prevent that moving forward? I guess it just comes down to companies making more, you know, is it more educated decisions from leadership positions, or is it people within the company stepping up and saying something when they know that something isn't right? So how do we avoid those issues going forward?
I mean, I think you educate consumers, right? You make sure that people understand what bad product is so that
Okay.
when they come across it, they're like, oh, this is like, I'm aware the apple is bruised. Like, I can see it right off the bat. I
Hmm.
understand for myself. Then I think you have to have competition, kind of like talking about small farms and places like that. That's one of the benefits to them. When you have people that are pursuing, a superior quality of product, it gives that option of, oh, if you don't like what they're selling in bulk, we're allowed to sell you our limited amount. But because we're selling it directly to you, we're selling it for half the cost. You just have a better quality. Their supply chain is shorter. And it's like, hey, we may only be selling a half acre or an acre of this as opposed to, 4 to 40 acres, but we
Oh
are
yeah.
able to get you the product you want.
Man, I think that's kind of how it should be moving forward. You know, I think that
Yeah.
it's that almost kind of ties into I have a philosophy of a lot of small interlinking Venn diagrams of supply. Essentially, it's I think of supply as like a circle of influence within your local area. And so if you can link up a lot of those small circles versus just having one large circle for an entire area, I think that when you see issues in the supply chain too, because with any agricultural career, you can't prevent issues, you can only prepare and act whenever things happen. Um, those other communities that are surrounding can come in and kind of like help make sure that you know everybody's well taken care of until the farm that's struggling gets back on their feet. I think that, yeah, man, there should be a lot of little circles of supply. I think
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna put the hash pipe down for the for the remainder of this one. Man, I'm out here thinking in circles too.
it's so easy when it's like, oh, I lost 400 clones to mold. Oh, my neighbor, I actually know who they are, and they happen to have 100 extra of whatever random thing they were growing that year. They
Hmm.
actually help me out, or vice versa, or whatever it is. Like, it just makes things work better. It's the difference between making a living and, like, I think running a business kind of in air quotes comes in. Like, what's the objective here? What's the expansion idea?
Hmm. And
How far
it's
do you want to
like,
go?
yeah, and why do you want to do it? It's like, are you wanting to just make cash to be able, it's like you're saying, do you want to just make the living, or do you want to make something that's going to have a lasting impact on the people around you,
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned for a moment terpene therapy farms. Is that a future goal? Like, are you hoping to do some drops with flower and resin as licensing comes in? Like, should people be on the lookout for it?
Of course, it probably will not be under that name. That's just kind of a work in progress name right now.
Hmm.
I feel like I'll keep the flour and hash thing. Maybe from what I've learned, it's better to have maybe a couple different brands under a parent company, rather than, you know, diluting the podcast image with terpene therapy branded flour and hash and whatever. That being
Hmm.
said, you'll be able to get all of that flour and hash whenever it's available, through the terpene therapy platform, which will, be set in stone. It's being built right now, but like I'm saying, you got to have that surfboard built before the wave comes. And we plan, and there's going to be more than that. We plan on doing like an experience farm, essentially, where there's going to be cow cuddling and maybe like a little Airbnb property where whatever episode I happen to be releasing that week, let's say I'm doing an episode with Kailu Glass or Who's Who Solventless, we'd have
Hmm.
a whole, we'd have a lineup of Kailu Glass recyclers and bloopers, and, maybe 6 grams of Who's Who hash in the fridge for you if you stay at the Airbnb. It's just going to be you know, a whole experience farm is what we like to call it.
And you've got a couple of projects now. Did you want to talk about them where people can pick up terpene therapy branded stuff? I think some roach clips and some shirts and some other things like that.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah. So as far as t-shirts, go to terpenetherapy.com or terpenetherapypodcast.shop. But yeah, and I'm still working on the point of sale right now because all of the banks that I have tried to get a bank account with don't really like the nature of what I'm doing necessarily, which is understandable because if I'm doing what I'm doing correctly right now, it probably won't be bankable until cannabis is federally legal, and I've come to accept that. But
Hmm.
you can still use, I think, Venmo and PayPal. I believe I have those set up on the website, so you can check out via that. If you have any issues with it, always send me a DM on Instagram, and we'll get you sorted out and make sure we get those shirts. And I got a couple stickers up there too as well. We'll get those shirts and stickers to you. But on the other hand, we've got a collab, and so this is the first ever branded collab with Terpene Therapy. So we're doing a Mystic Timber terpene therapy. I call it the collab tool dab tool, but that's because I think of silly little names for things. It's essentially a collaboration between our two brands. I've used Mystic Timber tools for essentially the entire existence of terpene therapy, and so it's really, for me, it's really cool to have my own little brand, on the tool that I use every single day. And those are available on mystictimber.com. I'm actually going to pull up the website right now to make sure that's what it's called. Mystictimber.com. And you can go to their fresh drops tab, and my tool is the first one on the top. So, every single tool purchase helps to ensure that, all terpene therapy listeners out there get cooler episodes and, just generally a cooler set in the future, because I'm hoping to build the Terpene Therapy set. We're just hanging out in the dining room right now.
And do you want to talk for a moment about Mystic Timber and why you chose them to do a collab with?
And so I didn't actually choose them. They chose me. They reached out on Instagram one day, and I opened up the message, and it's just like, it's one of those moments where it almost doesn't even seem real. So they reached out and they were like, we really, enjoy what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. And how would you like to have your own, branded tool collab? And then, we got to talking about the details and like what that would entail. And it's one of those moments where you're just kind of like, pretty happy the entire rest of the day. I will say that, it's one of those things that I'll remember for a long time.
And so people can't see it on the video, but you've got a few different ones. Are they all available or one in
Nope, not
particular?
yet. Not yet. The one that's available right now is let's see what they're officially calling it. The Mystic Timber X Terpene Therapy Podcast. It is the Pocket Maple Flat tool. And so it comes in the maple wood color. The other ones that we have, which if y'all have seen any of the episodes recently, we have this on the set. We've got a red, a purple, and another one in maple, and as well as a like a oak wood color, which is the roach clip. And the roach clip is hilarious to me because it's huge. It's a comically large roach clip. I feel like an evil villain whenever I'm smoking a joint with this thing in the best way possible. It definitely makes me giggle every time I use it.
It was
But
giving
yeah,
me
we've
some
got,
real Gandalf vibes. It's so long.
man, I tell you what, yeah, it really does. But yeah, right now the only one that's available is the Pocket Maple Flat. But if y'all out there listening and buy a whole bunch of these, and I mean just buy a whole bunch of them, you might get some more styles released in the future.
And is there anything else that you wanted to put the word out about or like talk to people about before I let you go?
Oh yeah, well, we've got actually when's this one gonna come out? It would depend on that, but we've got a few different episodes coming up for the
Oh yeah,
rest
where
of.
can people find your podcast? Talk about your podcast. We didn't even get to that. Yeah, explain
Well,
to
you
people
know
what
what?
terpene therapy is.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate that. This is the elevator pitch for Terpene Therapy. We're essentially a Kentucky-based but traveling around all over kind of podcast about cannabis, hash, and everything surrounding that. It's a lot of fun. It's education disguised as entertainment, and I think that's the best way to get people to stick around. Beyond that, we're just over here, making lots of clouds, enjoying lots of terps, and trying to bring the best information that we can to each and every one of y'all out there.
And you mentioned Brandon Rust, but like you actually have a huge amount of people that have been on and have been really consistent in putting out content. So I guess I would like to pile in on there and be like, go and I hope people go and check out your page because you have a ton of great guests.
Well, listen, I really appreciate that, man. I think it's just what I think it comes down to is kind of, it's like you said, the consistency. It's showing up every single Thursday at 7 gives people a little bit more faith in their ability to appear on a platform like that. And so it seems like people are just starting to reach out more and more. We've got some really interesting guests lined up here coming up for the rest of 2023. But yeah, man, Brandon Rust, another one that we did this year was Nika T out in Colorado. That is an episode that probably I shouldn't have even been able to do until about 5 years from now, but it just so happened that the stars aligned at that right moment. And he was gracious enough to invite me over, and we got the episode knocked out. I mean, we've done episodes from all over. I think we've got Colorado, we've even got one in Virginia, that was crazy. You know, I never thought I would end up in Richmond, Virginia, doing a terpene therapy episode. And that one's with the Wandering Hashishin, and we were talking about the East Coast Connoisseur Cup. But yeah, we've got a whole bunch of different people on there, and I kind of go back and forth between having guests on and doing solo episodes, because all of my favorite podcasts that I listen to, that, you know, kind of were the inspirations for terpene therapy while it was being created, you know, all of those people kind of do that too. So I guess I embody that in a sense, you know. I think it's important.
Any words of wisdom or any other projects you want to talk about?
Words of wisdom would definitely be: question your farmer, question where your cannabis came from, and try and understand what farming ethics align with your own personal beliefs. The more education that you have in this life, the more empowered you are to make choices that will benefit not only your quality of life, but by proxy, those around you. Because if you're doing good, you can help others do good too. And as far as any other projects, terpene therapy is the #1 project right now that I've got going on. And we're actually got the next Oregon tour coming up soon. So I'll be leaving tomorrow, and then there'll be episodes coming out with Terp Taffy and Purple Leaf Society. And then we've also got Kung Fu Vape Hardware. And then it's still up in the air, but I'm going to kind of manifest it right now, potentially an episode with Tree City Solventless. So, you know, stay tuned for all those. You know, I say we, because I like to think of terpene therapy as me doing it, but if you all weren't out there listening, it wouldn't exist either way. So it is a we thing. So, you know, we've got a whole lot of cool episodes coming down the pipeline. You know, all I can say is I just appreciate the continued support, because it doesn't happen without each and every one of y'all.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast too. I really appreciate it. And it's good talking with you again.
Oh man, you know, it's always good. You know, it's always good talking with you. I think that it's really cool that you're doing what you're doing, because the more people that are helping provide education in these easily accessible formats, I think the better off not only our cannabis community in Kentucky will be, but just our whole entire species will be better off if more people are doing what you're doing, you know.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Bluegrass Podcast. Again, that was Jacob Danielsen-Moore playing Glow Around the Light and Don't Turn Away. If you're looking for our musical guest, we've got a link in the description as well as on the website, bluegrasscannabis.com, where you can find our social media tags, store, and everything you might need to get in touch with us. Bluegrass Cannabis, old-fashioned, all natural, Kentucky bluegrass.